In today's video, I'm showing you how to take this image and turn it into this image, and I'm going to show you every step of my workflow along the way. Here's the starting image in Photolab before I've made any adjustments. As you can see, it's suffering from quite a few problems, but there are some nice features about it. One of the things I do like is this side lighting that's coming through across the mountains here and to a lesser extent here. Now we'll have to enhance that later, and I've got a couple of tricks that I'll show you to try to emphasize this and possibly even add some more side lighting. The main problem with the image is that it's lacking contrast. If you look up to the histogram, you'll see that it's well away from either end of the histogram, so there's nothing even approaching a true black or a true white. Now that will be addressed as we progress through the editing. The next problem I see is that there's really no intense colour in this scene. The hillside's very wet and it was quite colourful to the eye, but because of the lack of contrast that's being created, it's actually detracting from the colour. The other thing is, if I zoom in to 1:1 magnification, you can see that it's just a little bit soft, and again that's happened because of the atmospherics and the distance between me and the subject matter. Finally, if I go up to the clouds, you can see, well, I can see just a very small hint of what will turn into noise when I enhance the contrast on this image, so I'm going to have to address that. Now, the way that I usually address all these things is in Photolab, because I found that it produces such a high quality starting image, and that's what I need. I want something that's very high quality, so when I manipulate it, it's not going to exaggerate any problems. At the moment, I don't have any adjustments applied in Photolab. I do this with all my images because I like to build up the adjustments so that I can see what they're actually doing. Despite this, my first step is always to apply what I call my default adjustments, and in fact I have these saved as a preset which I can use, but rather than use that, I'll show you what they are. Now, if you want to know more about these, I do have a separate video, and I'll include information in the YouTube description below with a link to that video. The first adjustment I want to use is smart lighting. Now, this will correct any obvious exposure problems, and immediately you can see that it's started to correct the low contrast effect. We're now seeing the side lighting much more obvious in the image, and it's also created more shadows. Now, I could change from using the slight adjustment to medium and even strong. Now, whilst those do give a good effect, it may be that they're too strong for other adjustments I want to apply, so I'm going to go back and I'll start with slight, which is where I usually make my adjustments. Next, I'm going to go and use the DxO Clearview Plus option, and this will add a lot more contrast into the image. And immediately you can see the really dark shadows starting to be opened up, but at the same time we've got more blacks. Now, I don't want it to be this strong, so I'm going to just drop it down to around 10. And it may be that I come back and adjust that later. I often find that a value of around 10 is all that's needed with most of these images. Next, we're going to go over to the Detail tab here, and I'm going to apply Deep Prime Noise Reduction, and that's something I always do with any more Micro Four Thirds image. I'll also apply the Lens Sharpness and the Chromatic Aberration Removal, and I apply all of these at the default settings. I don't need to do anything else. The other adjustment that I always apply is over here in the Geometry tab, where I use the Distortion Correction. Now, I've got the distortion correction option here based on the DxO modules, and that's the default that I want. I can do that because this is a raw file that I'm working on. If this wasn't a raw file, you wouldn't be able to use that option. Now, those are my default adjustments that gets the image looking actually quite good, but it deals with some of the quality issues that I was mentioning earlier. Now, if you don't have DxO Photolab, obviously other RAW converters have similar features. If you've got the DxO Pure RAW application, then that will actually take care of all the options that I've just explained. It does those automatically. Now, something else that I will be doing with this image is I'll be changing the color profile. If I come over to the color tab here, you can see that the color rendering is set to generic rendering. Now, I'm going to change this because whilst the generic rendering is very good in DxO Photolab, like in a lot of RAW converters, some of the colours can become a bit distorted. So what I'm going to do is change this to a camera body rendering. What this allows me to do is select a simulation based on other camera bodies, and you can see there's quite a lot listed. Now, whether or not you have all these in your version of Photolab or not, I don't know. And the reason for that is that some of these may have been built into the DxO Film Pack product, which I also have installed on my computer. Certainly a lot of the film simulations that I have available have come from the Film Pack. Now for this image, the rendering I'm going to use is I'm going to come down and just pick this Olympus EM1 rendering. And when I select that, you can see immediately that it's changed the colour a little bit more and enhanced the contrast. And that gets me nearer to what I want to create with this image. I'm then going to crop this image because there's a little bit of light hillside down here that I'm finding distracting. So I'm just going to crop that out, actually. Just hold down my Shift key so that I can crop without being constrained by the original image format, and I'll just take a little bit, only a small amount, off the top of the sky. If I compare this now to the original, you can see already that we're making quite a substantial improvement to the image. The next thing I want to do is actually apply a local adjustment because the sky is actually looking a little bit too light. So if I come over to the Local Adjustments tab, and I'll click on the Local Adjustments button so I can add them. I'm just going to right click now and pick the control line option. Now, if you don't know about control lines, they're absolutely a brilliant tool in Photolab. I do have another video on this, and I'll include the video details in the YouTube description below. Now, if I add a selection just above the top part of the image, now what I can do is I'll just turn on the masks. And now I can take this sample point and move it around the image to pick the best sample position. Now it's not making too much difference at the moment depending on where I'm placing that. But what I can do is use these options here to refine that mask. And now that's looking more like what I wanted to select. So I'll just turn the mask off, and now I can apply my adjustments. I want to darken that area of the image, and I also want to apply a little bit more Clearview Plus adjustment into the top part. And that's all I really need to do with that to make the image look more in balance. So I'll just close that now. And now I'm at the point where I can export this into Photoshop, where I'm going to do further adjustments. So I'll just open up the option here, and then I'll select Export. I'm going to export to Photoshop, which I've already got selected. I'm exporting in a TIFF format, 16 bits, and I'm using the Adobe RGB image color profile. So I'll just export that, and then we'll open again in Photoshop. Now, the reason that I tend to edit a lot of my images in Photoshop rather than Affinity Photo is because of all the additional plugins and extensions that I already have in Photoshop, and a lot of these aren't supported in Affinity. I also have the option of using smart objects in Photoshop, which means that my editing adjustments in these plugins can be saved and then adjusted later if I need to. Now with this image, if I zoom into 100%, you can see that the image is reasonably sharp, but there are areas like here where it's gone a little bit soft. I'm going to address these now using Topaz Sharpen AI. Now the first thing I'm going to do is duplicate my layer using the shortcut Command and J, and if you're using a PC that's Control and J. That gives me a separate layer that I can now work on because applying the Topaz adjustment is a destructive edit. Now in the Filters menu, I'll just select Topaz Labs and I'll use the Sharpen AI option. And this is a great tool for editing and enhancing the sharpness of images where maybe elements are just a little bit too soft. Now with this image, there's a lot of options that you see up here in the sharpen models, and each one is tuned to do a different function. And if you want to know more about these, I do have a separate video where I run through how I tend to work with my images. I'll include the details to that video in the YouTube description below for this video. Now, I've already been through these models, and I know that what makes a reasonable adjustment is the too soft, very blurry option. And if I turn on the automatic adjustments, you can see that it's got the remove blur setting and suppress noise. Now I'm going to take suppress noise out because the deep prime adjustment that I used earlier makes such a good job of this. The results of that look reasonably good on screen, so I'm just going to apply it now. And now I'm back in Photoshop. So if I go to 100%, you can see the effect that's had on the detail in the image here. If I turn the layer off, you can see the original, which is a little bit softer. So it does seem to have really sharpened things up. And again, in the house down here, the original was quite blurred. The sharpened option is really quite sharp, and I can actually see windows on the house. Just go back to fit screen. Now I've got both of my layers now together. I've got the original and the sharpened option. I can just rename that to sharper, and I'll select both of them together, and now I'm going to select the convert for smart filters. And that allows me to apply other plugin adjustments, and any changes I make in those plugins will then be saved as part of the smart object, and I'll be able to edit them later. Now, the first of those plugins that I'm going to use is one called Exposure X7. And this used to be a company called Alien Skin, but they've renamed themselves to be Exposure Software. And they make an absolutely great plugin. And you can use this as actually a separate editing environment in its own right, but I'm going to use it as a plugin today. I'm now going to apply the Exposure X7 filter from the Filters menu. The thing I like about Exposure X7 is it's got a huge range of really good film simulations. Some of these are going to look great with this image because what I want to do is use them to enhance the colour as well as the contrast in the scene. I have a favourite when it comes to a scene like this, which is Kodak Ektar. If I go over here to the colour print films, I can actually see a thumbnail of the different options, and Ektar being one of those. And when I move my mouse over it, you can see how it enhances the colour and contrast. Now I'll click that to select and apply it to this image. Now unfortunately, it's made some of the shadows just a little bit darker than I would like. And the way it does that is through the tone curve. I'll just expand that section and you can see the tone curve being applied. I'm going to actually take the dark shadow area and just move it up a little bit to lighten those shadows. I'm going to move this point further up towards the midtones to draw those darker. And then I'll take this point in the highlights and just make it a little bit brighter. And as you can see, that's enhanced the areas here and along the ridgeline and the hills. The other adjustment I'm going to make in here is to the colour. Now at the moment, the way it's working is it's applied a colour filter at a very low level over the image, which is part of the Kodak simulation. I'm actually going to enhance though the mid-tone saturation levels to just boost those a little bit further. Overall, I'm seeing the colours coming through now really well in this image. Now what I want to do is enhance those light rays that I said I could see earlier here and here. I'm going to do it by applying additional light rays. The way I'm going to do that is to add a new layer to the image. This means I've got now a full set of adjustments, just like I had on the base layer, but I can start again. One of those is for the overlays, and the overlays have different options such as borders and textures, but also light effects, which is what I want to use. Now I'll click on these, and I can scroll through different light effects in different categories. And the ones I want are the sun flare. And if I come down to the bottom of that, I've got a tree rays coming from the left, and I'll just apply those to the image. Now those look great, but they're a little bit too strong, and they're covering the entire frame. I don't really want them in these dark areas here. The way I can address that is using the masking options. if I click the masking options and go to selections, I can now scroll down and I've got a luminance range selection, and I can use that to limit where those bright areas appear. So now I can remove them from the lightest areas of the image and also from the darkest areas. And that creates quite a nice effect, except I don't want them in this area here because they're turning the area white, and also I want to remove from some areas up here. The way I'll do that is now to use the brush tool, and I'll use that to delete here the adjustment. I'm just brushing over with a light brush, and I'll also come down here just to make sure we remove it from there. And I'm going to remove it to some degree in the sky. I'll probably put the flow for the brush up to a higher value just so that I can remove it a little bit more quickly. And again on the hills, I'll just come down the slope just to remove it a bit further. There we go. That looks reasonable. Let's just turn the layer off. And you can see the effect blending in quite subtly, but it is there, and it's enhanced what was already there in the image. I'm reasonably happy with that, and I want to now go back to my original lower layer, and I'm going to add a vignette to this image now, just to darken the edges a little bit further. I want a soft vignette, and I'm just going to make it a little bit more rectangular in shape. Let's just check the size. And that looks quite reasonable. I'll also just set the vignette location to be the center of it to be on the hillside here. That seems to make a good job. The overall strength is a little bit too strong now because we're losing the detail in the shadow areas here. But overall, I'm quite happy with that. So I'll now apply my changes. And as I mentioned earlier, because this is a smart object, if I don't like my changes, I can go in and adjust them further later. I now need to move on to the next step, which is to enhance the contrast a little bit further. I'm often asked, what are all these icons down the right side of my screen? And the answer to that is there are plugins or extension panels that do specific things. Now I'm going to use one of these next because I want to enhance the contrast in this image. And the plugin I'm going to use is one from a company called Know How Transfer, and it's called Shape. The panel's really simple and easy to use. You've got a couple of options about how you want to do things. Do you want to enhance the global contrast, local contrast, or do you want to apply some sharpening? Now I'm just going to use the default local adjustment, and you can see the effect that has on the hillside. I'm just going to knock off the sharpening effect because it does add a bit of sharpness, and then I'm just going to run the settings to apply them to this new layer that's been created in the layers window. Now that contrast enhancement's being applied across the entire screen, and I'm not sure I want it across all of the image. So what I'll do is I'll add a new layer mask to that. I'll invert it to hide the effect, and now I'll take a white paintbrush and I'll set that up at about 40% whilst I paint. And now I'm just going to paint over areas where I want to introduce that contrast enhancement. And I'm doing this with a soft brush so that you can't see any change, and it enhances it by blending it into the areas already there. So I'm just painting over just freely in these areas where I want to enhance it, and it's really where the light's falling onto the hillside where you would see the contrast increase. There we go. I'll just turn that layer off, and you can see the adjustment that it's applied. It looks pretty good at this stage. My next step is to make a frequency separation because I want to apply a softening effect to the image. At the moment it's quite a harsh image, and if I use this softening technique it can really add a sense of glowing light on the scene. The way I'm going to do the frequency separation is not manually, but instead use another plugin by the same Know How Transfer team. This one is called Wow Frequency Equalizer, and it makes these frequency separations much easier. Now, if you want to do a manual frequency separation, because you don't have this plugin, I've got another video on how to do that, and I'll include a link and details to that in the YouTube video information. All I'm going to do with the frequency equalizer though is just click the quick option. And I'm going to use a value of 20, which is the same as the number of megapixels in this camera. Now that's created a frequency separation, and what I've got now is a high frequency and a low frequency layer. If I take the high frequency layer and I reduce the opacity, you'll see that it blurs the image. Now I'm just going to set that to something around 90% at the moment to include a very soft blur. I'll just turn the layer off so you can just about make out the difference. I'm now going to duplicate the low frequency layer, and I'm going to call that soft glow. And this is how we create this glowing light effect. And I'm just going to reduce the opacity of that down to around 20%. And now I'm going to change the blend mode of it to soft light. And that creates a lovely soft glowing effect on the hillside. Now at the moment it applies this soft glow to all the tonal range of the image, so everything's being affected. What I want to do though is remove it from the darkest tones because I don't really want them to have this sort of enhancement. It's one where you would see the effect on light areas but not dark. The way I'm going to do that is by using the TK Actions plugin. I've got the TK7 Rapid Mask here, and I'm going to tell it to create me a layer mask. And I'm going to create one with the Darks 3 layer. Now I won't go into why I've picked Darks 3 other than I know this works, and it works more or less with every image. Now once I've created the layer, which you can now see here, this layer mask, I'm going to invert it by clicking this option. Now I can adjust those tones in the layer mask until I get them the way that I want. Okay, so I'm happy with that. I'll just turn that option off, and that's created me a layer mask which, as you can see here, it's dark in these areas here but not in the other areas. I'll just hold down Alt and click on it so you can see, and now you can see where it will be applying this effect. Now once I've done that, I can click on my soft glow layer that I created, and I can try increasing the opacity, and that gives a really nice sense of light and a painterly feel to the image. That's it on, and that's it off. So I'm happy with that now overall. And the final step is something that's a bit optional. I'm going to actually just add a levels adjustment layer. I don't want it in the group, I'll just drag it to the top. And now I can use that to refine the tones in the image a little bit further and just open them up and make sure that we've got the full tonal range included. And that is the image finished. Here's the starting image, and here's my finished edited image. If you've enjoyed this video, you might like this video showing another of my photo editing examples.